Welcome to Government Speak. This is where we'll cut through the government speak to get the information you need about county programs, services, and events straight from the source. Welcome to Government Speak, Contra Costa County's official podcast. I'm your host, Christy Jordan, Contra Costa County's Public Information Officer. And on this episode, we have Confire Deputy Chief Chuck Stark joining us in studio at 10 Douglas. Chief, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Christy.
So every day that I go home, I get in the car, drive down Muir Road here in Martinez, heading toward Pacheco. And off in the horizon, I see kind of in between Concord and Bay Point, there's a really noticeable, sizable patch of charred grass among the brown grass. And I think about, where we're at in terms of fire season this month. How has the fire season been? It just feels like it's longer, more intense. And what's ahead for us as a community?
Well, Christy, what you've noticed is something that's been probably changing over the past 10 years or so. Fire seasons, if it feels like they're getting longer and hotter, it's because they're getting longer and hotter. That's really, you're feeling what's going on. A lot of the state is in the same predicament we're in, and we really don't have a fire season per se anymore. It's just pretty much year-round, just the level of threat that we have. We start off here in June. Sometimes we are consistent in May, and it extends all the way through Halloween consistently, and we sometimes extend into November a couple months. But our fuel here is very light. We don't have the heavy timber that they do in the mountains, and we don't have the snow accumulation in the wintertime. So even in a period of January, where you would think it's wintertime, we just had Christmas, how could we have a wildland fire? With a long period of drought, it's easy for our fuels to dry out, and we have had fairly significant fires, wildland fires, even in the month of January, as recently as a couple years ago. So we have a year-long problem now. It's just a matter of degree, and going into these months, they're very critical. September, October, they're some of our more dangerous months. We have actually a higher volume of fires in the beginning of the fire season, June, but we have our more damaging and more threatening fires in September, October, and even to November, because the fuel is so dry, and we start experiencing our foehn winds, they call them. You would probably recognize them as sundowners or Santa Anas in Southern California, but here we have the Diablos. And this time of year is when we start seeing that offshore flow pick up, and the fuel is so dry that it gets heated, and with the winds and the humidity, we can be in a very vulnerable position really quick.
But it's not like we're waiting for those conditions. I mean, Confire is anticipating.
Absolutely.
So talk about some of the work that, the district's doing to mitigate, lessen the impacts of potential wildfires, and then, what's working when we do see a fire to minimize those impacts.
Right. My responsibility in the fire district is the operations section. So I like to talk about fire engines and bulldozers and all that stuff. I will get to that, but what I wanted to start off with is the Prevention Bureau in our district. They do a tremendous job of fire prevention work, fuel mitigation. In the past couple years with the Measure X initiative, we got a lot of dollars to do fuel mitigation work. The Bureau has put in for CAL FIRE grants to do mitigation work, and they're also working with adjoining fire districts to make continuous lines of defense. So all that work is paying dividends towards reducing the possibility of a large-scale fire. They also have crews that go out to some of the homeless encampments, because we have a lot of issues with fires starting in those areas. They have teams that go out and do education, mitigation in those areas. That helps a lot too. We've seen some decreases in fires from those types of encampments because of the interaction that our crews have had with those folks, teaching them to be more fire smart. So I need to tout that because it's something that's I'm very proud of what they've been doing. I think they're doing a great job, and I think there's just a lot of room to keep expanding those types of programs because preventing the fire solves all the problems.
Right.
But when the fires do start, as of recently, we've, again, with Measure X and with annexation, we've added companies, we've built stations and added companies, so our capacity and our bandwidth is the strongest it's ever been. We have a lot of men and women out there that can go and fight the fires when they happen. So that's been an improvement I've seen over the past 5 years is our staffing levels are really, really good.
How many people do we have who actively go out and fight fires?
Our minimum staffing levels on a day-to-day basis is 387 people. That's what we have staffed in the fire stations. That includes the fire crews, the truck companies, the training staff, all of the operational personnel is 387 per day.
And you mentioned Measure X a couple of times. We've talked about it here before, but just so folks know, half-cent sales tax approved by voters a few years ago for community support type services, which also includes some fire services. And I think one of the areas that I'm curious about, I've heard about Hand Crew 12. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about what they do?
The crew started out funded through the fire district. It was to be a fuels mitigation unit. Basically, they were to go do projects to try to clean up problem lots and improve evacuation routes for folks, limbing trees, things of that nature. During the fire season, when the fires were occurring, they would go out and help get the crews back into service so we'd have a quicker turnaround and be available for the next fire. It was a 5-year plan with the help of Measure X and a lot of ingenuity from the folks involved with the program. It has taken off. We went from, a part-time program to a full-time 7-day-a-week, 12-hour-a-day program with 2 crews that alternate. It's amazing the amount of work you can get done with 18 motivated young men and women. They really get after it and they do a good job. During the fires and also during the mitigation. So they are an integral part of what fire prevention does. So they are on both sides of the fence. They're working in the fire prevention arena in the off season when it's a little wetter, and they're working in the suppression section in the summertime when it's a little drier. So we get full use of them throughout the year.
What are some of the ways in which they work? So, we talk about weed abatement, mm-hmm. trimming trees, that sort of thing. But what are some of the tools that they're actually going out there and using? So
they use hand tools. They're basically a hand tool team. They do have some power tools. They'll have a sawyer and some people to help with brushing the larger stuff. But primarily they're using tools that people at home are familiar with. They're using modified rakes, shovels, things of that nature, and they're basically just cutting a line in the fuel between the fire and the non-burned down to dirt, and they're just making a path where the fire can't cross, basically cutting it off at the pass, if you will. That's okay. Basically their responsibility.
What are some of the other kind of tactics and techniques that the district's using to mitigate?
Well, we have the increased staffing, which helps. We have the hand crew, which helps. For several years in a part-time, for many years in a part-time basis, and for several years in a full-time basis, we've had a heavy equipment program. It's basically a bulldozer that's staffed during the summer months to help with. They help with fire trail maintenance at the beginning of the fire season, and then they're also into the suppression part in the summer months. So they're basically a force multiplier. They can cut line similar to what the hand crew does, but more quickly and wider, and they can put in a lot of work rather quickly. We call it a force multiplier because it would probably take 20 fire crews to do what they're able to do just by driving that blade through the fire.
Wow. That's really impressive. Beyond, we've talked a lot about what the district can do and is doing to mitigate impacts, but the responsibility for fire prevention can also fall on property owners. So what are some things that people can do to help with those efforts to minimize the impacts of wildfires on our community?
We've seen this practically applied out in the field. The folks that are best with housekeeping and mitigating their own property's defensible space, those are where the success stories happen, right? It only takes a little bit of vegetation and a little bit of junk, if you will, about the property to provide a ladder for that fire to spread directly into the residence. So when we go into these situations, we're looking to protect homes and life first. So giving us a fighting chance by developing a perimeter around your home, clear of vegetation, cutting back trees, planting plantings that aren't as susceptible to fire helps, and then hardening your home, keeping stuff off the deck, keeping the eaves clean, non-combustible roof coverings, things of that nature also go a long way.
But you also have to put some thought into the timing of those projects, right? Because it feels like I'm reading more and more about folks who are either, they've got chains on their vehicles that are dragging or, potentially creating a spark, or they're using lawnmowers and they hit a stone or something like that. What are some words of advice for folks when they're tackling these projects?
Do them early in the morning. Do them early in the year. It's a fine line. You don't want to do them too early, especially the weed abatement, because if you do them too early, you could get more rain late in the season and actually have a second growth. So you don't want to have to go back and do them twice. So you kind of have to time it right at the beginning of the season to do it. But definitely if you're going to mow, we get a lot of mower strikes, weed whackers, especially with the metal blades. They are ferrous, and you hit a rock and you will start a fire. And if the fuel's receptive, which it very well may be if you're out there after 10 o'clock or during a dry spell, you could easily start a fire and they spread more quickly than you can put it out yourself. You think you may be able to stomp it out or pour a bucket of water on it. You may get lucky, but you probably won't. So check the weather, make sure you're not doing it during a exceptionally low humidity day, and then do it as early in the morning as you can, because the humidity it's in your favor in the morning. Beyond
some of those personal impacts and the ways in which people can have some control over, trying to lessen the impacts of the wildfires, and then also making sure that the work that they're doing is supporting Confire's efforts. How do people actually stay safe during wildfire season? I know what, my family and I, my loved ones, we have a plan in place, and we have our go bags, and we've talked about evacuation routes, and we're signed up for all of the alerts. But, what are some ways that people can stay safe?
Well, you've named pretty much all of them right there. Be aware, pay attention to what the weather's doing, especially if you live in a fire-prone area. If you live in the wildland-urban interface, this is where it's most important. Someone living in the middle of downtown Concord or Martinez, maybe not as important unless you live in a pocket, then you need to be cognizant of that. But being aware of what's going on is probably paramount. Secondarily is having your plan on how you're going to get out and have your stuff together ahead of time, ready to go, because your brain disconnects a little bit when you're in the fight or flight, and you're in a fight or flight when you get evacuated. So to have your medicines, to have your pets, to have any elderly parents or neighbors or whatever that are living with you, having a plan for getting them out, and exercising it ahead of time is important. And then signing up for the alerts, that's gonna be the quickest way to know when it's time to get out. CWSalerts.org, is it .org?
Yeah, that's right, .org.
.org. They got everything on there. I actually downloaded the preparedness and evacuation plan that's on that website. It's between the sheriff's office and Confire, and I just went through this morning again. This has everything you need to know. So if you go on there and you read this, you're going to be set for the wildland emergency that may come along.
And for folks listening, community warning system is a text message, email, and phone-based alert system that'll give you information around evacuations and progress made on response efforts. So you sign up for that. Go to cwsalerts.org, and you can choose how you want to receive those alerts. Now, given that tool, again, would highly encourage folks in the community to sign up for that. What's the difference between an evacuation alert versus an evacuation warning? When do you actually have to go?
So these terms get confused very easily, and I still confuse them myself. And I think some of it gets mixed up with the weather and the evacuations. And the weather alerts are especially confusing. So a red flag, I'm probably going to screw this up right now. A red flag warning is actually occurring. A red flag watch may occur. That's for the weather. For evacuations, an evacuation warning is something that may happen. An evacuation order is you need to go now.
And who calls the evacuation orders? Who's responsible for that?
It's by law, it's the police authority having jurisdiction. That's who's responsible for evacuations. Practically how it happens is a partnership between, if in the case of a wildfire, it would be the fire commander and the police commander together making these decisions, deciding where we need to go and what we need to do. And then those are relayed to the community warning system that puts out the alert.
So an evacuation warning is a potential threat, and an evacuation order is you need to go.
Right.
Grab your stuff, grab your loved ones, and get out.
Yes. We typically try to give an alert if possible, and if it's practical, just so people have the time to start getting stuff together. My advice to anyone, especially if you're a little less spry, is that if you hear an alert, just start going. There's no problem with that, just going, getting out. But the order, you definitely need to get going.
Yeah, and making that decision is really tough when it's a warning, because you want to make sure you have all of your items.
Right.
That you had mentioned earlier, any loved ones, pets, medications, clothing, all sorts of things. So that's good to know, especially as, we're looking at fire season activity ramping up, over here in the coming weeks. Just a couple of other communication tools to flag. So, community warning system, you can also follow them on social media. They're on X, otherwise known as Twitter. And you can follow the Contra Costa County Fire Protection District, otherwise known as Confire, on X, Facebook, and Instagram for the official department news and information. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your career with Confire and beyond. You're a deputy chief, you oversee operations. How long have you been in this field, and what keeps you coming back?
I've been in the field, I started a long time ago. In 1997, I started as basically what they called a sleeper at a small place in Sonoma County. Did that while I was going to paramedic school. I've been in the career fire service for close to 25 years now. A couple agencies other than Confire, but the majority of my time has been here at Contra Costa Fire since 2002. I spent a lot of time riding around on fire engines and ambulances. The majority of my career has been in the field, but I have progressed through the ranks. I've been a firefighter and engineer, captain, battalion chief, and up to the current position I hold now as deputy chief. I think what has always kept me coming back was just the ability to do different days. You never know what you're going to get in the field. It's luck of the draw on the calls you get, but even in these administrative positions, I have been able to participate in a number of programs that I never thought I would be involved with. I'm a fairly simple person. I'm a graduate of Pittsburgh High School in East Bay. I grew up here, so looking back, I can't believe that I'm in the position I'm in now, and I'm making decisions on multi-million-dollar budgets and, contracts for ambulances and helicopters and things of that nature. So I've had a very fulfilling career, and I question myself every day, how in the heck did I get here? But
I bet there are no 2 days that look alike for you.
yeah.
So we've talked about wildfire season. We've talked about what folks can do to help lessen the impacts of wildfire and being proactive and being prepared for emergencies. Let's switch gears and talk a bit about some of that administrative discussion. So within the past few months, we've heard Chief Burchard and the Board of Supervisors discuss a shortage of ambulances in our county. Do you have any updates for that? On how to solve this issue?
Yeah, I do. I think first I'd like to start off by adding some context to where we came from and the term shortage. Coming out of the pandemic, it wasn't just the ambulance system. It was pretty much a healthcare problem in general, is that as essential workers in healthcare, a lot of people got burnt out. And we saw this in paramedics and EMTs, we saw it in nurses, and we've seen it even in doctors. So we had a big time challenge getting people to stay in the profession and hire new people. So we had a lot of attrition during and in the months after we started coming out of the pandemic. So we did have some staffing problems that caused us not to be able to staff the correct number of ambulances. Looking for solutions there, we were able to shift gears a little bit and hire the people we could so we could get more EMTs and less medics. So a plan was put together that we worked with the county LIMSA and the district and the ambulance provider to put on more ambulances, but at a lesser level of care, and try to triage some of the lesser level calls to these lesser ambulances, the BLS ambulances. So flash forward to now, we don't really have an ambulance shortage anymore. We actually have 13 to 18 more ambulances than we did several months ago. The paramedic hiring has stabilized. We don't see nearly as many people calling off or not being able to fill the shifts. The staffing has been fairly consistent and much improved over what it used to be. So we're very well staffed on the ALS side, which is historically we've had enough ambulances to cover. And we also have these additional 13 to 18 BLS ambulances. So in the past several months, the compliance numbers for what the contract holds us to for response times has actually been very well, been very good. We still have one-offs. We still have bad days, but overall, that's why the compliance is by a month, is because you can't accurately predict what's going to happen every day. And sometimes there's a lot of calls and sometimes there's not. We still do struggle with the availability of ambulances, even though they're staffed. There are times when they're either, mostly they're stuck waiting to offload people at the hospital. They can only have one patient at a time. So until they can release that person to the higher level of care, they can't go back into service. So we still occasionally experience difficulties with that, which leads to delays. But as to the shortage of ambulances, I think we found a method to solve that problem. The next thing we're moving to is how do we reduce the amount of calls that we're required to go to? Because there is a certain percentage that likely do not need an ambulance to transport, and that's where initiatives we're looking at, like nurse navigation, where they would be sent to a nurse to get their needs met in a way other than going to the hospital. Because not only does that impact us with transporting, it impacts the emergency rooms who, just like us, they're struggling with staffing. They're struggling with the sheer amount of volume that comes into their departments. So pulling that relief valve, we hope, in the coming months when it gets implemented, will be something that will help not only our service, but the whole system that includes the hospitals as well.
So it's more proactive outreach on what rises to the level of a paramedic transport, so that
Yes.
folks aren't calling for everything. But,
Yeah.
but if they're having an emergency, they're calling 911.
Absolutely. And we're there for that. And there's checks and balances to make sure that people don't, we're all human. Things are going to slip through the cracks and someone's going to accidentally get put to a place, but there's checks and balances to make sure they get put back in so we don't inappropriately triage someone to a level of care that isn't appropriate for them. But there are a number of things that, people just, maybe they need their medications refilled. They don't need to go to the emergency room for that. Lower level care, a chronic condition, things like that, we can set them up with urgent care with physicians, alternate destinations other than having to go in a highly trained paramedic ambulance to an emergency room.
We've covered a lot today. If there was one takeaway for folks listening, what would that be?
Well, I think considering what we've gone over, the takeaway would be an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. So whether that's prepping your house for wildland, being able to get out quick, or preparing yourself for a medical emergency where you keep up on your your prescriptions and your doctor's appointments. It's always better to not have to use an emergency service than to have to use an emergency service. So, ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure.
Well, thank you so much for being here,
Thank you.
Chief. I appreciate it. That's it for today's show. I'm Christy Jordan, Contra Costa County's Public Information Officer. Thanks for joining us on Government Speak, brought to you by the Office of Communications and Media. But don't just take our word for it. Stay curious, stay connected, and stay informed. Until next time, keep your mind open and your facts straight.